Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today, we'll be asking how Israel's National Emergency Service, known as Magen David Adom, is dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. Warm welcome to the programme, and have two special guests today, all from Magen David Adom. They are Daniel Berger, who is the Chief Executive of MDA UK, and Barbara Dingle, who are very much involved in Christian Friends of Magen David Adom. So welcome to the programme. Daniel, it's been a few years since you've been on the Middle East Report, so warm welcome back, and thank you for the excellent work that you do regarding the work of MDA in saving lives in Israel. But can you share with us, with our viewers, how you have such a passion for the work of MDA and how you got involved and then became the Chief Executive of the UK organisation?
Oh, hello, Simon. Thank you so much for having me back. It really, I can't believe it's been so long when we were talking about it, but it's lovely to be back here with Barbara. Yeah, we're really rewinding the clock now. I've been involved for 9 and a bit years, just over 9 years. In fact, I know because it's my daughter's birthday this week. She's turning 10, and I remember she was 8 months old when I joined. So, yeah, it's a cause I was approached by the then chairman to ask. I was at another foundation to ask whether I'd consider coming on board and taking over from the late Ellie Benson, who sadly passed a couple of years ago. He wanted to retire at 70 and gave them 5 years' notice. And like all good boards, they left it 4 years before doing anything. And I remember we were in Israel for a family wedding, and I said, let me go out. I'll spend a couple of days on the road, and I'll go and look at some projects and meet the teams there, because over here, it's great work, but it's an office. I wanted to actually really see what MDA is on the ground. And I can honestly say I fell in love with the cause. I was absolutely bowled over by the fact that it's not just a Jewish ambulance service, and as you know, it's so much more. And I think for me, the final icing on the cake, or even the cherry on the top of the cake, was knowing that it was Israel's Red Cross Society. And I think it's the service for everyone, served by everyone. And that was what absolutely clinched the deal for me. And nearly, well, over 9 years on, I don't regret it. I still love it. I can wake up every morning and say, I love my job.
Fantastic. There's very few people in that position. I love my job as well. And Barbara, I want to thank you for the work you've been doing, particularly with pioneering Christian Friends of Magen David Adom. As a Christian, how important is it that you have got involved in one of the most tremendous Israeli organisations that saves lives in Israel, whether they're Jews or whether they're Christians or whether they're Arabs? This is part of Israel's National Emergency Service, and Christians are playing a huge role. Share with us the role that Christians have played in getting alongside the work of our Jewish friends at MDA.
Well, Simon, thank you for welcoming me back. It's lovely to be here again, and I love to talk about MDA. Like Daniel, it's something I feel very passionate about. And for us Christians, I think it's a new day. Christians and Jews working together for a common cause, saving lives in Israel. And I'm reminded of that psalm, I think it's 133, Yachad. There's a blessing when brothers dwell together in harmony. And MDA provides a real opportunity for Christians and Jews to work together and to save lives. That's very, very special. And I'd like to thank you and all your viewers who are all part of this wonderful work.
That's a pleasure. And Daniel, can you share with us the impact that Christian Friends of Magen David Adom have done in terms of helping to not only spread the message, but also generate support for the work of MDA in the UK, but also in Israel where it's needed?
Well, let's start here. And firstly, I need to congratulate Barbara. Barbara has, and she hasn't told you this yet, but Barbara has been appointed the first trustee of MDA UK that is a member of the CFMDA board. So, as you were saying, Barbara, that really goes to recognise the strength and the partnership and the unity between our faiths and our beliefs and the passion for MDA. So really, from all of us, congratulations again.
Well, thank you. If I can say, it's a great honour, and I thank you, Daniel, and your board for entrusting me with this role. But Simon, I must say this, it's not just me, our president of Christian Friends of MDA, Mark Madeley, he's also been appointed a vice president, which is a great honour. And both Mark and myself know that this honour also is for all the Christians who have supported us over many years. So anyone who has given either financially or perhaps invited us to their church, this is an honour for the whole Christian community that Mark and myself have been entrusted with this role in what is really a predominantly Jewish organisation.
That is fabulous. It is fabulous. And we got a very interesting picture to show now, haven't we? This is the outgoing Israeli ambassador, Mark Regev, together with Daniel and Barbara. Daniel, do you want to describe this very interesting picture right outside the Israeli embassy?
Yeah, well, firstly, the moment of euphoria. I think that was the first time in 3 months I put a shirt on and got into the West End. So from Hertfordshire to High Street Kensington was 35 minutes in the car. So just the sheer excitement of getting off a Zoom call and meeting people in the flesh was fantastic. But Mark, as ambassador, has been an amazing mentor and an amazing friend, both to MDA UK and also to myself on some issues where we've discussed, and he really has been fantastic. And we didn't want to see him go without marking the occasion. And it was so hard because in normal times we might have held a dinner with some of our supporters or done something to say, Mark, thank you so much, best wishes for the future. But here we couldn't do anything. So I called Sharon Barley, his deputy and now the charge d'affaires, and said, we need to do something to mark, excuse the pun, Mark's departure as ambassador. And we actually have a motorbike here in the UK that goes from event to event, so people can use it as a signpost to see what it actually looks like and get some photos on it. And we decided as a board to dedicate it to Mark as a thank you. So now wherever that goes in the UK, that has Mark's name on the back of it, saying thank you so much for your support of MDA in the UK.
Fabulous.
And can I add, it was particularly apt because the very first event that Ambassador Mark Regev hosted in the embassy when he arrived in 2016 was the 10th anniversary of the founding of Christian Friends of MDA. So we were very honoured to be there right at the beginning.
Absolutely, this is great. So let's have now a look at the overall work done in Israel by Magen David Adom, as last year MDA celebrated its 70th anniversary.
The story of Magen David Adom is woven into the history of Israel. Since before the state was even established, we have been saving lives. In 1949, the Knesset enshrined our position as the country's only national medical emergency service into law. Throughout the decades, we have been there for every Israeli, irrespective of gender, race, or religion. And, when needs be, we have taken our skills and expertise and saved lives across the globe. None of this would have been possible without 70 years of support from our friends around the world. Friends like Magen David Adom UK. Saving lives in Israel is in your blood. It's in mine too. My name is Dr. Shafir Botner. I'm working as a paramedic in Magen David Adom for the last about 20 years. I'm a second generation in Magen David Adom. My father used to work more than 40 years. All my sisters were also youth volunteers. So all our family were mixed into the stories, the experiences, the excitement, and the DNA of Magen David Adom. MDA is part of my family, and I'm part of the family of MDA. Magen David Adom is not like any other ambulance service in the world. We deal with everything you might expect, but we also need to be ready for the very real threat of terror. The life and death moments that can haunt a young paramedic forever.
Nothing in the world can prepare someone working in Magen David Adom for any terror incident. It was Friday afternoon. I have ambulance with me on Fridays and Saturdays around Damascus Gate area. We got a call. They said there was shooting right outside Damascus Gate. There was chaos around. People were yelling. People didn't know where to go because the terrorists came from 3 different directions, some with guns, some with knives. And when we first started treating, there was still shooting happening on the scene. You don't have time for emotions. There's no time for too much thought. When we arrived on the scene, we saw a soldier, female soldier, laying on the floor. She had stab wounds in her throat, her chest, in her arms. She obviously lost a lot of blood. We loaded her up to the ambulance. We started driving. Right when we started driving, she lost her pulse. On the way to the hospital, they performed CPR. When they arrived at the hospital, unfortunately, they pronounced her dead. What we see obviously changes you, no matter what we've been through. At the end of the day, we go back home, we take our time, go through what we've experienced, and the next day when we get out on the scene, we're there with full force for anything that we're going to be faced that day, and we treat it the best way we can.
Supporting Magen David Adom is not just about supporting Israel's medical emergency service. You are also enabling our team to go out into the world and show Israel for what it really is, a country that values life above everything else. When Tal joined MDA, she could never have imagined where she would end up.
Breaking news this morning of a strong earthquake measuring around about 7.5 hitting Nepal.
Magen David Adom is part of Red Cross, and part of the Red Cross is to go to zones after disasters. And Israel, specifically Magen David Adom, has the ability to get ready really quick. I really feel that it's very, very important to help not only at your hometown, not only the person next to you, but in a bigger scale. When my boss approached me about Nepal, I was very excited. I didn't hesitate. My parents did, but I did not hesitate. The earthquake in Nepal, it was very strong. A lot of people got buried under their houses. A lot of houses got crushed. A lot of roads were damaged. A lot of people died and were left homeless. It was basically like a scene of a horror movie. One of the nights I was with about 10 to 14 babies, and then one of the aftershocks starts. There's more babies than adults in the room, so everybody just cover the babies with your own body, and you're like, if the ceiling fall on me, I will survive, the baby won't. It was a very nervous situation, but at time, I was so focused in the mission that I was not nervous, not afraid. It's not okay if I'll be afraid. I came to help. They are afraid. I'm there to help them. Coming back to Israel and saying the story and telling my parents, and my dad specifically, was like, crazy. Wasn't that scary? And I'm like, yeah, you know what? It was. I think in international disasters, if you ask people, who do you think the first responders are? They'll say America and China and other big, great countries, but it was us. And it says a lot about our ethics and who we are as people.
If I'm looking at the future, Magen David is a strong organization here in the state of Israel. If I'm looking on the young generations and I can look at their passion to Magen David Adom, I know that Magen David Adom will be here for many, many generations. For 70 years, you have helped us to save lives. Now we need your support more than ever before. Here in Ramle, you, Magen David Adom UK, together with our American friends and the Israeli government, are building a new national blood and logistics center, the largest development ever undertaken by Magen David Adom. This project will protect our vehicles, our blood supplies, and change the way we save lives across the country. Together, we have had a life-saving history. Your support will give us a life-saving future for generations to come.
And it's amazing to think that this is the 71st anniversary of the foundation of Magen David Adom being Israel's prime national emergency service in Israel that saves lives. Barbara, you've been to Israel many of times, and you've also seen the work of MDA in Israel. Can you describe one story of the work that you've seen being carried out by MDA in Israel?
Well, I have many stories, but one particular one is I've had the great experience of actually doing a shift or several shifts in MDA ambulances and really seeing what happens. And we talk about MDA looks after all the people of Israel, Jews and Arabs. Now, when you're in an ambulance doing a shift and perhaps you've got an Arab paramedic and you go to one of the settlement areas and you've got a very Jewish family and an Arab turns up, when the Jewish man has had a heart attack, they're not bothered who turns up. They just are so relieved to see a medic. So MDA really does bring all the people together.
Excellent. And Dan, I have to ask you as well, because it's only been in the last few weeks been able to have studio guests back in the programme because of COVID-19, and prior to that having to interview people via video link. How has MDA UK coped with the COVID-19 lockdown, and what have you been doing to inspire some of your supporters to keep them aware of the work of MDA in Israel?
Yeah, it's a good question, because, as I was saying before, actually having that opportunity to get out when we went to the embassy was so exciting. We're Zoomed out as a team. We do our daily check-ins on Zoom. So ironically, on one level, internally, we're probably communicating far better than ever before, because when you're in the office, there's always these assumptions that people know what's going on. But we've also been blessed with the opportunity to really plug the work of MDA in Israel, because MDA has been front and center, particularly at the beginning of the corona outbreak. And so that's given us the opportunity to communicate weekly with donors through emailers. We've sent out our Red Shield newsletter a couple of weeks ago. I think personally it's our strongest Red Shield in the time I've been there. And of course this is also the one that announces Barbara and Mark's lovely appointments on the back. And it gives us an opportunity to really talk about the work of MDA and how it's operated during these very difficult times. And I just want to link that into the anecdotal story that I was in Israel. I left for Tel Aviv on the 4th of March and arrived about an hour before Bibi announced a total lockdown in Europe, with pretty much the exception of the UK and the US. All other countries were going to be locked down within a matter of days. And like all good Israelis, everyone's thinking, they're meshiga, it's never going to happen, they're nuts, no one's going to stay put. And then I went to the call centre, the dispatch centre, to see how MDA was handling this. And I could see at that point calls were going from an average of 5,000 a day to 40,000 a day, and we thought that was a lot. And so to answer your question in a long way around, I then brought that information home, shared it with our donors, and had that opportunity, and thankfully off the back of it, and I'm very, very grateful to all of our support base here, we've actually seen donations rise. Not necessarily because of COVID, because we felt that we can't go out there. It would be morally wrong to ask for money for a coronavirus worldwide pandemic, because we're all in it together. But I think people felt that MDA had done such amazing work, and it still needs to operate its normal service on top of what was going on, that we saw this spike in donations.
Excellent. And Barbara, I mean, during this whole COVID-19 crisis, and we've had lockdown, and now we're easing restrictions, but it's still in this crisis, and rightly so in this country, that our heroes are those working in the NHS, those doctors and nurses who have risked their lives to deal with this COVID-19 global pandemic, together with the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, and everyone. These are our new heroes in the age of COVID-19. But what I think makes Israel's MDA, Magen David Adom, extra special is not only does Israel have to deal with routine medical emergencies, but also dealing with the threat of knife attacks, terror attacks, rocket attacks, also wars in its history as well. And now Israel is dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic, which has increased the work and the volume of MDA. So from your perspective, looking at it from the UK to Israel, how has Israel coped with COVID-19?
I think Israel has coped remarkably well. They've, as Daniel referred to, really they've been ahead of the game. One of the first countries to have this lockdown, putting people into quarantine. All the research also that's going on in Israel to deal with COVID, how best to treat patients. I think it's about just over 300 people who have now sadly died in Israel, but that's a relatively low figure.
Considering Israel has a population of nearly 9 million.
Yeah.
Daniel, you've got there in front of you all the latest stats and figures regarding the COVID-19 deaths, number of people who've got covered, how many people have actually been infected. When this crisis started, as you described earlier in the beginning of March, that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was very quick to close Israel down and to protect Israel. And out of this, it looked like Israel was being one of the most successful nations in dealing with COVID-19. But since lockdown, the number of cases of COVID-19 have increased dramatically to over 1,000 in a day. So how, in your opinion, has Israel dealt with COVID-19? And can you also give us the figures as the recording of this programme?
So I'll start with the easy question first. As of today, 600,000 samples have taken place. And when you say that there are roughly 9 million people, actually, that's a huge percentage of the country that has now been sampled and tested. And I think what's really interesting is 175,000 of those have been tested in the drive-through operations that MDA set up across the country, right the way through from Bedouin towns such as Rahat through to some of the Israeli Arab towns in the north and the Haredi population as well. So a complete diverse mix of the drive-throughs. In terms of cases, 43,000 cases in total, and as Barbara says, just over 300 fatalities. How has Israel coped with it? I think they've done amazingly well. I think they're now calling it a small second wave. There's definitely been an increase. Yesterday alone, 1,500 new cases discovered. We know that Israel has had two significant problems, both in the Haredi and the Israeli Arab communities, and you see this in areas where typically you have densely populated homes with lots of people living together. And they also, interestingly, we learnt that right at the beginning, it was very hard to communicate to the Haredi population because they don't have internet, they don't necessarily have television, and so whilst it was all on the news and everyone was seeing as a population, lockdown, don't do this, don't do that, the Haredim weren't seeing this information.
So let's have a look at this interesting video which says Israeli emergency medical services see a 700% increase in calls over coronavirus fears, and this was right at the start of the pandemic.
This National Operations Center where we are is currently the epicenter of the treatment of the coronavirus. Many of the questions that people are having arrive here. And if on a regular day we speak of 5,000 to 6,000 calls that this center takes, for the past 2 days we're speaking of 40,000 calls. This is the amount of people that are calling here, asking many questions regarding the coronavirus, how to treat it, whether they should stay home, how exactly they should be isolated, many questions. One very important question is how to make the distinction between coronavirus and another sickness, because of course the symptoms of corona are not much different than flu, than cold, than pneumonia maybe. We had the chance to speak with one of the paramedics here at the center earlier on, and he tried to explain how to make that distinction.
Any time that additional patient is being identified, the Israeli Ministry of Health publishes the places that he has been to and the time that he has been to, and this is published publicly in the website. So any Israeli that has influenza should go into this website and see if he stayed at the same location. If he didn't, he can act normally, treat himself or go to his doctor. But if he's been in contact with or been in those places, then he can call Magen David Adom, and we'll make sure that Magen David Adom paramedics comes and takes a coronavirus test.
And it seems as though with every hour that passes, more and more people are finding out that they have to spend time at home in quarantine. Thousands of residents of Jerusalem will have to spend the next 14 days at home as a new case of coronavirus has been announced in New York. But that woman from New York was here in Israel. She spent 5 days in Jerusalem at the end of February, and authorities here have made public the list of places where that woman has been. Any person who was at that place at that specific time is now instructed to stay at home, and this adds to the tens of thousands of people who basically learned yesterday that they have to go into quarantine. People that returned from places such as Spain, Germany, France, among others. Many Israelis, tens of thousands of them, are now in quarantine. When will this come to end? No one really knows.
And that video is a few months old, recorded, I think, sometime in March, which gives an indication of how MDA has been tackling the COVID-19 crisis. Barbara, if you compare the UK with Israel, the measures that Israel put in place were far stricter than the UK. Firstly, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, acted very, very quickly as soon as he knew that there was a major problem by shutting Israel down, by stopping flights coming into the country. And also, Israelis had to endure a much stricter and tougher lockdown regime than we did in the UK, and that's why the lockdown was released earlier. But how much do you think this has had a big impact on Israelis who so much love the outdoors, being stuck in their apartments, and how would you assess how Israel's handled COVID-19?
Well, certainly it's been very difficult for Israelis when they've had to stay in their apartments, or they can only go out for something like 200 meters. I was talking to a friend only this week who lives in Abu Ghosh, and she was saying how difficult it is to get to the shops because there's such a small distance where someone can walk. You have to admire Israel for dealing with this so quickly and so definitively. I know, I was on a Zoom call with former Ambassador Mark Regev, and he was saying even him as a former ambassador, when he returned to Israel after his time here in the UK, he had to go into a flat for 2 weeks isolation, and after 2 days, some official came to knock on the door to make sure he was there.
Amazing.
So Israel is doing a very good job at protecting its citizens.
Absolutely. And Israel's taken this serious crisis very, very seriously. And what we don't hear in the news, or we didn't hear in the news at the time, is the amazing work that Israel did to help their neighbours, the Palestinians, by providing them with the PPE equipment, which was much needed, medical supplies, and also helped a lot of those workers who live in Bethlehem, who work in Israel, to actually stay in Israel during this whole pandemic, so that they didn't affect their communities when they went home. And sadly, that didn't get the news coverage that it actually deserved, but it showed Israelis showing their true selves by showing a great heart for their neighbours, even though that Israel is pretty much in a state of war with the Palestinian Authority.
No, you're absolutely right. And actually, on that last point, I was seeing some great photos last week of the new blood centre in Ramla that will be completed next year. We saw that on the film. In order for this to carry on, the Palestinian workers were staying there. So MDA has set up huge tents in the car parks there with food, toilet, shower facilities, and they're sleeping there day in, day out. And I think that's been absolutely key to both the friendship and the resilience between its neighbours to get this project completed. And I think that's been really a remarkable feat, that it might have slowed down, but there hasn't been a single day go by where building work hasn't been carrying on and continuing out that new project.
Excellent. So let's have a look now at the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu congratulating MDA for the work they are doing in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis.
On behalf of the people of Israel, and on behalf of all of you, I'm sure, I wish to thank Eli Bin and the workers and volunteers, thousands and thousands of them, of Magen David Adom. We're facing the corona epidemic like all countries, but Israel has been doing better than most countries. And part of the reasons for our success are these wonderful, dedicated teams of Magen David Adom They often put themselves on the front line, and I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of the hearts of every citizen of Israel. Thank you, and keep up the good work.
There we have the Israeli Prime Minister thanking MDA for the great work they've been doing. In terms of Benjamin Netanyahu and his leadership, we see that he's managed to, over the last few months, put together a coalition now with the Blue and White Party. Benny Gantz is the Defence Secretary or Defence Minister, and that Benny Gantz will be Prime Minister in 2 years' time. So he's got a working government, a working coalition, but it must have been incredibly difficult for the Prime Minister not having a proper functioning government to not only run the country but also to tackle the COVID-19 crisis. What do you make of his leadership ability?
Well, extraordinary times. I mean, 3 general elections and it still wasn't clear-cut. But I'm sure, like a lot of your viewers, we Christians who love Israel, we've been praying for the person of God's choice. A lot of us believe it is Bibi Netanyahu for such a time as this. And we trust God that Israel has the leadership it needs at this time. Of course, 2 years with Bibi and 2 years with Benny Gantz, but 2 years is a long time. And 2 years is a very long time in Israeli politics. So we just take a day at a time and let's see what happens.
Absolutely. And Daniel, there was talk back in March that Israel was very, very close to developing the vaccine for COVID-19, and we want really Israel to be the first to come out and say that they've got the vaccine and it's a good vaccine that will actually defeat COVID-19 and stop this pandemic. But can you share with us the work of MDA in helping to develop that vaccine that could save millions of lives across the globe?
Yeah, and you're right. It would be absolutely wonderful, especially for our BDS friends, to be able to say that Israel's got the vaccine, and let's see them not take it. But yes, MDA, as the national blood inventory of Israel, collecting 98% of Israel's blood supply, has been absolutely front and center in terms of blood donations and plasma donations, because you can actually just donate plasma as a unit rather than the whole blood unit. And they have been taking plasma from positively tested but fully recovered patients and cross-matching it with those that have been critically ill from COVID to try and develop antibodies. And this has been something that Professor Shinar and her teams have been working on for a number of months now, with some good success stories. And that's what's great. And I think what's really been important here is the use of the bloodmobiles, because here, we know there's the age-old adage of if the mountain won't come to Muhammad, and so people don't go to blood centres normally to give blood. It's going out of their way. And particularly during Corona, there was this paradox of MDA's desperate for blood, but you've got to do it in a socially distanced manner, and therefore you can't come into the centre. So they deployed at over 100% capacity every single mobile blood unit. And I say over 100% because they were converting ambulances into mobile blood units. And some of these vehicles are 20 years old, and they're really beyond economic repair. And that's where our Christian friends we're very grateful to, because they're well on their way to buying us a new bloodmobile. And these vehicles park in places such as Rabin Square or in the Old City, very high footfall areas, to get the blood units.
And, yeah, which is a good time to talk about Christian friends of Magen David Adom, Barbara, and the number of ambulances and mobile motorbikes that CFI MDA has supplied Israel. Can you share with us how many ambulances and medical equipment that CFI has actually supplied to MDA in Israel?
This, I think, is very precious. We know the Bible tells us life is in the blood, and we know the theme of the blood covenant running all through the Bible, and most of all for us Christians, the blood of Jesus. So to actually be involved in Israel's blood service is very precious, as I've just said. So Christian friends of MDA, and I want to thank all your viewers who have helped us in any way. We're about 14 years old now. We had our bar mitzvah last year. So during those 14 years, Christians in the UK have given 5 ambulances to Israel. Yep. We're almost at our second bloodmobile, which collects the blood. an emergency room right up in the north in Kiryat Shmona by the border with Lebanon. And we've given 4 Medicycles as well, which we couldn't have done this, we know, in our own strength. Truly, God has touched, spoken to Christians who have been so generous, so an enormous thank you to everyone who has donated. And going back to our current project, it's very exciting, our second Bloodmobile in gestation. We're over halfway there. We know, I'm sure you know, Simon, British people haven't been able to give blood when they've been in Israel because of World Health Organization directive concerning mad cow disease. I think the age now is 23, 24. Anyone over that can't give blood. But we always say people can give virtually by perhaps giving a donation, no matter how small, how big, to help fund our next Bloodmobile and to help the blood supply in Israel.
Excellent. And Daniel, I have to ask you, when Israelis see that there's an MDA ambulance that's been dedicated by Christian Friends of Magen David Adom UK or in the States or Canada, how did the Israelis respond? Because you told me a very interesting fact I didn't know, that MDA is the second recognised and trusted brand in Israel, only second to the IDF, and that's an amazing achievement considering how many brands there are in Israel. So what is the response of Israelis when they see an ambulance and it's got dedicated and donated by Christian Friends of Magen David Adom?
Oh, immense pride. I think to see anything dedicated by their Christian friends and the support base and the love and the compassion shown is just, it fills Israelis with pride. That's assuming they understand in the first place that the vehicles are actually donated by the diaspora. Because you'd be amazed, every time I go to security coming back home from Ben Gurion, they say, what do you mean MDA in the UK? What do you do? I'm saying, but don't you notice UK or US on the side of the vehicles? And they forget, because there's still this huge assumption that MDA is a government-run service. But once you get beneath that and you start talking about the donors and where the donations are coming from, they're full of pride.
Excellent. And let's have a look and see the work of MDA being done in the midst of the COVID-19 global pandemic.
In Israel, you know, we're used to have times of, I would say, war, rockets, sirens, missiles. This is a whole different kind of war against something you cannot see. It feels like Magen David Adom became the IDF of Israel now.
I feel like we're in war against invisible opponents. You know, you don't see it, you don't feel it, you don't smell it, but it's there.
You see them all over the country. 26,000 MDA staff and volunteers who are working day and night, testing, treating, and answering emergency medical calls.
It's not a sprint run, it's a marathon. It will take time.
One of their most effective projects this month, setting up drive-through coronavirus testing facilities.
You can do 50 cars a shift, 100 cars a shift easily.
Doing the swab while sitting in the car, they're not going out of the car, taking the swab and going back home.
While drive-through facilities allow for the highest volume of testing, MDA provides home and special ambulance testing for those who do not have access to a facility.
We built special ambulances that came to the neighborhood. The medics or the paramedics did not get out of the ambulance.
The challenging thing is to still treat patients, still give life support on the mobile intensive care units while you are on protective gear.
Preparing ourselves to unlimited time. We're preparing ourselves to walk at this mode like the virus is going to stay with us.
I'm working every day, sometimes morning till night.
At any given moment, at 1 second away, I can be called to somebody and just leave everything and run.
I mean, we're not trying to be pessimistic, but we understand that no one knows how long it's going to be.
And there we go, two very short videos, but definitely showing the work of MDA there in saving lives in Israel and dealing with COVID-19. Daniel, you've got an interesting story to tell us about this development that MDA involved in with the IDF of actually creating a paramedic bus, which on the surface sounds like an interesting concept, but can you share with us what this is and how this is really helping Israel during COVID-19?
Yeah, of course. So we like to think that Israel and also MDA is at the heart of innovation. And it came up with the concept with Egged, the bus company, and the IDF to take an old bus and turn it into a paramedic transport, an intensive care unit, actually. So similar to the yellow ambulances you see. And the idea here is that it can evacuate up to 13 patients at once, either from a multi-casualty event, or it was really born because of COVID, because the idea was, well, if you were going to somewhere, and it did, such as an old people's home, they evacuated 9 patients who had tested positive for COVID in one vehicle. So the contact is contained, and it's much easier to clean one vehicle afterwards than 9 separate ambulances. And so they put that on the road rapidly. And I think our Australian friends are raising money for a second one of these buses for the conversion of it.
Excellent. And also a practical question. We know from this country that a lot of paramedics have caught COVID-19 by going into patients' homes, and so there's been a large number of paramedics that caught COVID-19. How has Israel been able to protect their own medical staff and the paramedics from COVID-19?
So I think 2 slightly different questions. In terms of protecting the staff, it's got its PPE. It's had trouble at the beginning, like all of us, but as we know, the Secret Service was involved in getting some of the procurement of, and it has the PPE that it requires. It actually converted ambulances with a sealed unit behind the driver, so they had dedicated COVID ambulances on the road as well. But I think certainly in terms of making sure that it had enough health professionals, when lockdown was announced, the country immediately prohibited any health professional from leaving the country, and it also tried to bring them all back as quickly as possible, so that people outside of Israel who were medical professionals had to come back, and they were going to have to go into 2-week quarantine, but get them started as soon as they could. So that's what it did. It locked down all professionals as soon as the announcement came out.
And Bobby, you made an interesting point that about blood types, and made a connection that those with blood type A are more susceptible to getting COVID-19. And you said that this goes a long way explaining why there's been such a large number of, sadly, Jewish deaths in this country with COVID-19. Can you explain what you mean by blood type A and why this is important?
Yes, there have been some interesting, albeit sad, statistics about COVID fatalities. We know in the UK the number of fatalities amongst the Jewish community has been disproportionately high. Something like over 500 people have died, including a few of MDA's major supporters. I was on a call with Professor Shinar, who heads up the blood bank in Israel and works very closely as part of MDA. And I understand, as you said, people with blood group A seem to be more susceptible. Now, in the UK, blood group O is the most popular blood group. Professor Shinar told me that in Israel, it's blood group A that's the most prevalent. I'm not quite sure how all this fits together, because one would have assumed Jewish people would have similar DNA. So I think we need further research in this to really understand it more.
And Daniel, we know with MDA that not only do they reach out to Israelis, be it Christian or Jews or Muslims or anyone from any faith or background, including their neighbours with the Palestinian Authority, but also that Israel is very much involved in international aid projects around the world. Can you share with us how Israel has been involved in setting up a testing centre deep in Africa in the Congo?
Yeah, this was great. This is a lovely story. As you rightly say, MDA, as a member of the International Red Cross, goes wherever there is a need to help. But it was approached by the Red Cross Society in the Congo and said, can you help us? We've seen this amazing work you're doing with the drive-through test centres. Can we help? Or can they help? So, of course, no one could go anywhere, so all of this was done virtually. Equipment was sent out to help where they needed it. The Red Cross provided some of that equipment, and it's wonderful to see some of the photos come back. It's just another great news story of MDA working on the international stage, even when it's not allowed to leave the country.
Excellent. And Barbara, in terms of how Israel has dealt with this, and it's a kind of new normal we're having with the reduction in social distancing, everyone having to wear face masks. How much do you think that Israeli technology has really helped, particularly with the tracking and tracing of COVID-19 and those who have it, using the latest innovative technology in order to get ahead of this crisis? Because Israel's been leading the world in terms of dealing with this.
Well, we know Israel is a very high-tech country, very innovative, and they've been very quick to be able to use equipment that perhaps has been originally devised for one application to very quickly switch it to helping monitoring patients, monitoring people with temperatures, fevers. So the high-tech country, once again, leading the world in many ways.
Excellent. And Daniel, the opening programme, we showed your wonderful video which celebrated 70 years of MDA, and thankfully now you're about to celebrate your 71st anniversary. But can you share with us the biggest project that MDA are doing, and that is the National Blood Centre, and why the National Blood Centre is so important, and how close are you to completion?
Yeah, it's a hugely exciting project. It's also MDA's 90th birthday this year in Israel, so established in 1930. So it's really wonderful that this project is virtually at completion stage now. This is taking Israel's blood supplies and putting it up to 17 meters underground. And I think this is a remarkable feat of engineering. This project has been on the cards for well over a decade now. Professor Shinar has said that this is what she wants, and she's going to retire once the place is up and running. This is her baby and her dream. It's MDA's biggest ever capital project. It's costing $120 million. It's enormous. And why does Israel need it? Why does MDA need it? Well, it's simple, really. There's three key components to the current blood centre in Tel HaShomer that are a real problem. Firstly, we've talked about neighbours. Whilst it works and gets on with the Palestinian Authority and other neighbours, they're not always the most friendly, and we know now that rockets can reach anywhere in Israel, and with the Iranian rockets with proper missile guidance systems, the blood centre in Tel HaShomer is a target, and if that was taken out and some of the blood inventories were taken out, it would be an unmitigating disaster. So by putting the blood underground, it's protecting it. Secondly, Israelis fear an earthquake. They're probably more fearful of an earthquake than they are a terror attack, actually. And we know history has told us that roughly every 100 years there is an earthquake, and Israel is overdue its next big earthquake, and it sits on two fault lines. So all new buildings are built to earthquake standards, and they have to be able to withstand an earthquake. The blood centre in Tel HaShomer was built before those standards came into force, and so that building, again, couldn't withstand a serious tremor. And then thirdly, the population growth. We're talking about 9 million now. They're predicting 11, 12, 13 million and climbing. So this project will ensure that there's capacity for the blood to grow at the same level as the population over the next 2 to 3 decades.
Excellent. Barbara, down to the last 4 minutes now. We have many of our viewers who work in our medical profession, work in the NHS, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and as Christians have a passion for Israel. How can they get involved and help with the work of Christian Friends of Magen David Adom?
Thank you. First of all, do contact us. There are lots of opportunities. We love to have invitations to come and speak in churches once we're able to. We can arrange Zoom calls, or let's hope we're able to get out with social distancing, etc. Donations, of course, however small, every single little donation, big donation is expected. And sometimes people like to, at this time of year, think what they're going to do in their church at Christmas time. And churches have a collection or an appeal at Christmas. How special to be saving lives in Israel. And I know, sadly, some churches aren't totally on board for Israel. So MDA is a great way to say to a church, please support life-saving in Israel, and it's helping Jews and Arabs, Palestinians, everyone. So it's not a political donation.
Absolutely. Same question to you again, really. Daniel, how can our viewers get involved who have a passion for Israel and have a passion for saving lives in Israel? And this is why I think MDA comes up trumps when it comes to finding organisations and ministries that people can really get behind and really support.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wouldn't be doing my job as a fundraiser if I didn't say please donate. The website I can see is on the screen. Please donate to MDA UK. I must say that our Christian support base is our most loyal support base of all. We see even the smaller donations, which really do count. Any level counts. The average Christian Friends donor is giving 8 times a year. So even if they're giving £5, that's a significant amount of money by the time you multiply that up. And it's only through our Christian support that we can get this bloodmobile finished. And I would say, at any level, please give to the website there. There's also a contact us form. If you would like to do a shift on an ambulance, we would be honoured to have you once we can get back to Israel. So please go to the Contact Us page on the website and be in touch, and someone from my office will be back in touch with you. And I promise you, when we can get back out to Israel, you will be very welcome to do a shift, to come and see the facilities and learn more about this amazing organisation firsthand.
That's amazing. I hope that offer applies to me as well. So, Barbara, in the closing moments, I have to leave that now because we've come to the end of the programme. So I want to thank you so much for being my guest on the programme, and thank you so much for sharing the work of Christian Friends of Magen David Adom and the work of Magen David Adom in the UK.
Pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Pleasure. And I just want to thank you for watching this programme today. Many of you ask, how can you actually support Israel in a practical way? And one way you can do that is by supporting the great work of Magen David Adom, who save lives in Israel. They are Israel's #1 national emergency service, and they don't discriminate against Jew or Arabs. Even if there's a terrorist attack, MDA will actually go and help those terrorists who are involved in that terrorist attack, because what they do is they save lives. So it's important to not only hold the work of MDA in prayer, but also to support them. And if you're in Israel, why don't you get in touch with MDA and go and see the incredible work that they do at first hand. And this is something that I personally would like to do. I'd love to go on an ambulance and see the work they've been doing. So thank you so much for watching today's Middle East Report.